The ship came out of nowhere. One moment the sky was empty, and the next moment there was a shadow over half of Europe. People stopped in the streets and looked up. They pointed at the massive shape that blocked out the sun. Some screamed. Some prayed. Most just stood there with their mouths open, trying to understand what they were seeing. The ship was black and smooth, shaped like a teardrop the size of a mountain. It hung in the air without making any sound. No engines, no fire, no explanation. It was simply there, waiting. Within hours, every government on Earth received the same message. It came through every radio, every television, every phone and computer. The message was in every language at once, spoken by a voice that sounded almost human, but not quite. People of Earth, we are the Galactic Concord. We have watched your species for many generations. You have now reached a level of technology that requires our attention. A representative will meet with your leaders tomorrow. Please prepare a suitable location. That was all. No threats, no promises, just a simple statement of fact. The world went mad for a few hours. There were riots in some cities and celebrations in others. Religious leaders gave speeches about angels and demons. Scientists tried to explain what was happening, but they understood as little as everyone else. The next day, a smaller ship came down from the larger one. It landed in Geneva, Switzerland, where the United Nations had quickly assembled every important leader they could find. Presidents and prime ministers sat next to kings and generals. They all watched as the door of the smaller ship opened. The alien that walked out was tall and thin, with skin like polished silver. It had 4 arms and 2 legs, and its eyes were completely black. It wore something that looked like flowing water, a robe that seemed to move on its own. When it spoke, its mouth did not move, but everyone heard the words clearly in their heads. I am Ambassador Zinthara of the Integration Bureau. I have performed this duty 943 times across many star systems. I am here to welcome humanity into the Galactic Concord. A woman stood up. She was General Adara Okonkwo, the head of a new military organization that had been created just 12 hours ago to deal with this exact situation. She was 60 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen many wars. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador, she said. We have many questions. Of course you do, Zinthara replied. All young species do. I will explain everything. And she did. For 3 days, the ambassador spoke to the leaders of Earth. She told them about the Galactic Concord, an organization of 12,000 species that had existed for almost 1,000,000 years. She explained how the Concord kept peace in the galaxy. Any species that developed the ability to travel faster than light was given a choice. They could join the Concord as a tributary species, which meant giving up their military and following Concord rules. In exchange, they would receive protection, trade, and access to technologies beyond their imagination. And if we refuse? General Okonkwo asked. No species has ever refused, Zinthara said. She sounded genuinely confused by the question. Why would they? The benefits are enormous. Tributary species live in safety and comfort. They never face war or invasion. They are cared for. What if we want to care for ourselves? You misunderstand. The Concord is not optional. If a species refuses to join, they are quarantined. Their star system is sealed off until they become mature enough to accept the offer. The room went very quiet. General Okonkwo leaned forward. How long does this quarantine last? As long as necessary. Sometimes centuries. Sometimes longer. Zinthara spread her 4 hands in a gesture that might have been meant to be calming. But this never happens. Every species sees reason eventually. The mathematics are simple. The Concord has 17 dreadnoughts in your orbit right now. Each one could destroy your entire planet. You have no ships that could even scratch their surface. Resistance is not just impossible. It is meaningless. The leaders of Earth looked at each other. Some faces showed fear. Others showed anger. A few showed something else, something harder to read. "We need time to discuss this among ourselves," General Okonkwo said. "Of course. I will give you 3 days." That is traditional. On the third day, General Okonkwo stood before the cameras. Her face was calm, her voice was steady. Behind her, every leader on Earth watched in silence. "Ambassador Zintara," she said, "we have made our decision. We thank you for explaining the situation so clearly. We understand the power of the Concord. We understand what you are offering and what you are threatening. We have considered everything carefully." She paused. The whole world was watching. "We decline. We will not join your Concord. We will not become a tributary species. And we will not be quarantined." On her ship, Zinthara felt something strange. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling. It was surprise. "You have 48 hours to remove your ships from our solar system," General Okonkwo continued. "After that time, we will consider your presence an act of war." The ambassador sent a response immediately, explaining that humanity must have misunderstood. They were facing the most powerful force in the history of the galaxy. They had no chance of resistance. General Okonkwo's reply was short. "We understood perfectly." 47 hours. In the silence that followed, the Galactic Concord realized that for the first time in 1,000,000 years, someone had said no. They did not yet understand what that would mean. But they would learn. The High Council of the Galactic Concord had not met in 600 years. There had been no need. The systems that kept 12,000 species in order worked perfectly. Tributary species paid their tributes, followed the rules, and received protection in return. Problems were small and local, handled by regional administrators without ever reaching the council. But now 17 dreadnoughts floated dead in space around a small blue planet. And no one could explain how. The council chamber was enormous. A sphere of crystal floating in the void between stars. Inside, 848 beings argued about what to do with humanity. They came in every shape and size, from creatures like mountains of flesh to beings made of pure light. All of them were confused. All of them were worried. None of them would admit to being afraid. "The humans somehow disabled our ships," said Fleet Commander Varash, a being that looked like a mass of tentacles wrapped around a glowing core. Every system failed at once. The crews were unconscious for 3 days. When they woke up, they found themselves drifting in escape pods at the edge of the solar system. The ships themselves were gone. "Gone?" repeated Councillor Mekthron, the oldest member of the council. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean exactly that. 17 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon, simply disappeared. We have no idea where they are or how the humans moved them." The council erupted in noise. 1,000,000 years of peace had made them forget what it felt like to face a real threat. They had grown comfortable, confident that their power was absolute. Now a species that had barely learned to leave its own planet had done something impossible. "This must be a mistake," said Councillor Zithan, who represented the economic interests of 3,000 species. "The humans have been observed for centuries. They fight wars among themselves. They nearly destroyed their own planet with pollution. They are primitives. Primitives who somehow accessed our communication network," Borish replied. "Primitives who broadcast their refusal across all 12,000 Concord systems simultaneously. Primitives who captured 17 of our most powerful warships without firing a single weapon." "Send more ships," demanded another counselor. "Send 1,000. Send 10,000. Show them the true power of the Concord." This time, the vote was quick. 847 counselors voted to send a fleet of 300 warships. Only Mech Thrawn voted against, arguing that they should learn more about humanity before taking action. No one listened to him. The fleet arrived at Earth 2 weeks later. 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack planets and tear holes in space. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, ready to crush any resistance. They found nothing. Earth floated peacefully in space, surrounded by small human ships that looked like toys compared to the Concorde vessels. The 17 captured dreadnoughts were nowhere to be seen. "Attention, human forces," the fleet commander broadcast. "You will surrender immediately. Your planet will be quarantined. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your major cities." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, General Okonkwo's face appeared on every screen in every ship. "You were warned," she said. She looked tired but calm, like someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Your ships will be returned after we have studied them. Your crews will be released unharmed. But you need to understand something." She leaned forward, and even though she was just an image on a screen, the fleet commander felt a strange chill. "We spent 200 years preparing for first contact. We knew someone would come eventually. We hoped they would be friendly, but we planned for the possibility that they would not be. We studied every piece of information we could find about the galaxy. We developed technologies in secret. We waited." On every ship in the fleet, the lights began to flicker. When your ambassador explained the Concorde's history, she was very honest. "We appreciated that. We learned exactly what happens to tributary species. The genetic modifications that make them more compliant. The cultural changes that make them forget who they were. The slow transformation into something useful and obedient. Systems started failing. Navigation went dark. Weapons went offline. Life support continued to function, but everything else began to shut down. Here is what will happen now," General Okonkwo said. "Your ships will stop working. Your crews will fall asleep. When they wake up, they will be far from Earth, in ships that have just enough power to call for help. They will not be harmed. We do not want to kill anyone. We just want to be left alone." The fleet commander tried to give orders, but his voice would not carry. Around him, his crew slumped over their stations, unconscious. "Tell your council this," General Okonkwo continued. "We did not choose this fight, but we will finish it. The next fleet you send will not be treated so gently. The Galactic Concorde is not welcome in our solar system. This is not a negotiation. This is a fact." Her image faded. The lights went out. 300 warships floated silently in the darkness of space, their crews dreaming of nothing, while Earth shone blue and white and defiant in the distance. 20 years passed. 20 years of war that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The Concorde expected the humans to build a great fleet and try to fight ship against ship. That was how wars had been fought 1,000,000 years ago, before the Concorde brought peace. They prepared for conventional warfare, massing their endless ships and their overwhelming numbers. The humans did not cooperate with these expectations. They called it the Prometheus Doctrine, named after an old story about a being who gave fire to humanity against the wishes of the gods. The humans did not attack the Concorde directly. They did not try to conquer systems or destroy fleets. Instead, they did something far more dangerous. They started telling the truth. Every species in the Concorde had been changed. When they first joined, they were promised protection and prosperity. What they received was something else. Their genes were quietly modified to make them more peaceful, more accepting, more willing to follow orders. Their histories were edited to remove any memory of what they had been before. Their cultures were shaped and trimmed until they fit neatly into the Concorde systems, After a few generations, no one remembered. The tributary species believed they had always been this way. They thought their obedience was natural. Their compliance was instinctive. They had no idea what had been taken from them. The humans found the records deep in the archives of the Concord, buried under layers of security that had not been tested in hundreds of thousands of years. There were files about every species, complete genetic sequences from before modification, cultural records from before integration. Everything the Concord had stolen was preserved, carefully labeled and stored, never meant to be seen again. Human hackers broke through the security in the 5th year of the war. By the 6th year, they were sharing the information with anyone who would listen. General Okonkwo, now 73 years old and commanding the Allied Liberation Forces, watched the reports come in from across the galaxy. The Viren, a species that had served as bureaucrats and administrators for 500,000 years, discovered that their ancestors had been poets and dreamers. Their genetic modifications had removed their creativity, turning them into perfect record keepers who never questioned anything. The architectural collective, who built all of the Concord's stations and ships, learned that their ancestors had created great works of art, temples and monuments, sculptures and paintings. Their modifications had focused their minds entirely on practical construction, erasing their ability to make anything beautiful. Thousands of species received similar information. Some denied it at first. Some were angry. Some did not know what to do with knowledge that changed everything they believed about themselves. But some of them remembered. The Viren sent a message to Earth on the 7th year. It was written in a form of poetry that no Viren had used in 500,000 years. They said they wanted to help. The architectural collective joined in the 10th year. They built ships for the Allied forces, but these ships were different. They were beautiful as well as functional. The builders rediscovered something they had lost, and they wept as they worked. One by one, species began to wake up. Some fled to human space. Others started rebellions in their own systems. The Concord responded with force, but they had forgotten how to fight wars. Their fleets were large but slow. Their strategies were ancient and predictable. They had never faced an enemy that refused to behave the way enemies were supposed to behave. The humans did not try to hold territory. They would strike at a system, broadcast the truth, and disappear before the Concord fleet arrived. They left behind information instead of occupation forces. They planted seeds of doubt instead of flags in the 15th year. General Okonkwo met with her command staff aboard the UNSS Remember Everything. The ship was crewed by 17 different species now. Her adjutant was a Viren named Korath who remembers, one of the first of his kind to reclaim his ancestral name. The Council has requested negotiations, Korath said. They want to offer peace. Okonkwo looked at the map of the galaxy. The Concord still held most of their territory. They still had more ships, more resources, more soldiers. But every year, more systems slipped away. Every year, more species remembered who they had been. What are their terms? They will recognize human independence. They will release any tributary species that wants to leave. They will stop expanding. It was a generous offer. Humans would be free, and so would anyone who chose to join them. The war could end. Okonkwo shook her head. Not good enough. General, they want to keep the rest. They want to maintain the system for everyone who does not actively rebel. They want permission to keep doing what they have always done. She turned to face her staff. Humans, Viren, members of the architectural collective, representatives of a dozen other species who had chosen to fight. We did not start this war for ourselves. We started it because what the Concord does is wrong. Every species deserves to know the truth. Every species deserves to choose for themselves. We do not stop until they all have that chance. Korath was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, an expression his species had not used in thousands of years. "My ancestors would have written a poem about this moment," he said. "Perhaps I will try." The war continued. The Treaty of Awakening was signed, 47 years after the first alien ship appeared over Earth. The ceremony took place aboard a station built by the Architectural Collective in neutral space, far from any system that had seen fighting. The station was called the Gallery of Forgotten Things, and its walls were covered with art from 10,000 species, works that had been hidden or destroyed and now were restored. General Adara Okonkwo was 93 years old. She had refused all offers of life extension treatment, saying that she had lived long enough and done enough, and that the future belonged to younger people. She walked slowly now, supported by a cane made of wood from Earth, but her eyes were still sharp and her voice was still strong. On one side of the great table sat the former leaders of the Galactic Concord. They looked tired and confused, like people waking from a long sleep. The organization they had served no longer existed. The systems that had controlled 12,000 species for 1,000,000 years had been dismantled, piece by piece, over the last 3 decades. On the other side sat the representatives of the Allied Liberation Forces. Humans, of course, but also Viren and members of the Architectural Collective, and hundreds of other species who had remembered who they were and chosen to fight. "The terms are simple," General Okonkwo said. "Every species receives complete access to their genetic records and cultural histories. Every species chooses for themselves what to do with that information. No one is forced to change, but no one is prevented from changing either. The choice is the point." The leader of the former Concord, a being named Tharnval, who had served as High Counselor for the last 3 centuries, stared at the document in front of him. His 4 hands trembled. "You are destroying everything we built," he said. "1,000,000 years of peace. 1,000,000 years of order." "We are destroying 1,000,000 years of theft," General Okonkwo replied. "You took the future from 12,000 species and told them it was for their own good. You are not the victims here." Tharnval signed the treaty. One by one, the other Concord leaders did the same. When it was finished, the Gallery of Forgotten Things erupted in celebration. Species that had not spoken to each other in millennia embraced. Languages that had been dead for thousands of years were shouted in joy. The transition was not easy. Nothing that matters is ever easy. Some species had been modified for so long that they could not return to what they had been. Their original forms were gone, their ancestral cultures preserved only in files and records. They had to build something new, something that belonged to them, something they chose. Some species looked at their unmodified histories and decided they did not want them back. They had changed, and they preferred what they had become. That was fine too. That was the whole point. The choice was theirs. Some species fell into chaos and conflict. They had been peaceful for so long that they had forgotten how to manage disagreements without the Concord to settle everything. They struggled. They fought. They learned it took decades for the galaxy to find a new balance. There were wars, small ones, as species tested their freedom and discovered its limits. There were famines and disasters as old supply lines broke down and new ones had to be built. There were tragedies that could have been avoided if the Concord had still existed to prevent them, but there was also something else. There was art, there was music, there was poetry and philosophy and science driven by curiosity instead of orders. There was chaos, yes, but there was also life. Messy and unpredictable and gloriously free. General Okonkwo gave her final public address on New Johannesburg, a human colony on a world that had been empty until the refugees started arriving. Behind her, the sky was full of ships from 100 different species, going about 100 different kinds of business. "People ask me why we chose war," she said. They asked if it was worth it. The lives lost, the decades of fighting, the uncertainty of everything that came after. She paused. The crowd before her was made of many species, many colors, many shapes. They had come to hear the woman who had led the rebellion, the general who had said no when no was supposed to be impossible. We chose war because the alternative was to stop being human. The Concord offered peace, but it was the peace of sleep, the quiet of a mind that has forgotten how to question. We would have been comfortable. We would have been safe. And we would have lost everything that makes us who we are. She smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of someone who had carried a heavy weight for a long time and was finally setting it down. Humanity chose war because we remembered something important. Freedom is not comfortable. Freedom is not safe. Freedom is hard work, every single day. The work of standing up and making choices and living with the results. The Concord took that from 12,000 species. They called it a gift. We called it theft. The crowd was silent, listening. The galaxy asked us who we were. We answered. We are the species that says no. We are the species that fights even when fighting seems impossible. We are the species that would rather struggle in freedom than rest in chains. She looked up at the sky full of ships, full of possibilities, full of futures that had not yet been written. We chose war, and we would choose it again. The cheering lasted for a long time. It came in many voices and many languages, a sound that would have been impossible 50 years ago. When the Concord controlled everything and silence was the only acceptable response to power. In the histories written afterward, scholars would debate whether humanity had made the right choice. They would calculate the costs and measure the benefits, and argue about whether freedom was worth what had been paid for it. But on that day, surrounded by the children of 1,000 worlds who were finally learning to speak with their own voices, no one doubted. No one questioned. Humanity had chosen war, and the galaxy was free.